the congregation as to what the problem is, that there is a problem, what the problem is, and possibilities of ways of addressing them, and to get that momentum going within their own congregation. In addition, I would suggest that, or I see that a spiritual leader, a leader of a congregation, could then reach outside their congregation as leader to another congregation, so that a rabbi and a priest or a minister and an imam could sit down and speak, or maybe many, to talk about these same issues, and having already brought it up to their own congregations, then bring the congregations together to do that. There are many different views as to the best way to address systemic racism. First is to convince everyone, I think, that it exists. And then it is to get a broad idea of how to address it. And I think oftentimes one congregation will say, this is the way to do it. We've got to move this way like a race car. But another congregation may view a different way. So instead, it might be better to broaden the approach to bring everyone along like bulldozer instead. So it's again, it's a matter of reaching in your congregation and then out to other congregations, and then bring the congregations together. Do I have a specific efforts already in place? We have small efforts. We don't have the large efforts that I wish we did, but that is where we are. We have small efforts reaching out to various congregations and various individuals, as well as working with the city.
Thank you, Rabbi. Anybody else like to chime in and answer or have any thoughts about that question?
Yes, I do. This is Naeem from the Ahlul Bayt Islamic Center. What I have, the comment that I have is common concern to the faith leader in the community. I think most people who go to places of worship, whether it's the church or the synagogue or the mosque, they're looking toward their spiritual leader for guidance. They look at us as representative of some sort. We do hold some sort of a truth. We have some information we'd like to share. They're not looking for a congressman or congresswoman or the leader particularly. They're looking for a religious figure that has a word of God with them to help them through those injustice days or those calamities they're going through. I think we do have influence. We can work with our community on a smaller scale and then enlarge that and go actually outside of our small community to the larger community to welcome peoples and educate one another and help one another. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would say too, to spearhead this kind of change takes a lot of courage, because in some congregations, if you start pushing the wrong way, there's a board or a leadership board that can vote you out or get you removed very quickly. And so I think that one of the reasons why we don't see I don't want to say global, but a large approach of spiritual leaders coming together is because I would imagine secretly some religious leaders are nervous about what buttons they want to push. Because it could literally jeopardize their career. And I know we say, well, we answer to God, then not man, but that's a little more challenging when your income's going to be removed by saying the wrong thing. And so I think that challenges, that's a hindrance, in my opinion, from us really coming together and facing these challenges head on.
Mother Dawn?
I would just like to bring a little humility to the conversation too, and some vulnerability to say, part of the reason why I'm participating in this conversation is to say, I don't have a lot of formal stuff figured out yet. And being a part of this conversation is, for me, a way to ask, what can we do? And to listen to what other people have to say, because I think I've often been in the position of leading and talking and not necessarily in the position of listening and being invited. And so I'm intentionally trying to find out from other people what ought to be done this time. I don't know.
Thank you. Reverend Kirkendall?
Yeah, I believe that if we're going to dismantle systemic racism, somewhere along the line, regardless of what it might cost us, we have to say we're willing to make the sacrifice because we need to stop it right where it's at. We have to be bold enough to stand courageously and believe in what we believe in. It will never change. We'll just keep having conversation after conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to stand and also take a chance where maybe we might end up losing our salary. But however, I'm sure Dr. King and other leaders that faced the same thing felt the same way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Can we move on to the next question, Sam?
Sure.
Next question is for Sister Deborah Dirks.
Yeah, and this question is one that was asked by the community, the last of our panelists. So this is the one that comes from our visitors, our people who are listening. What should we teach our kids about systemic racism? What resources are available to parent, caregivers, and faith leaders?
This is an interesting question because it is talking about education. Unfortunately, the education that our young people have been receiving in school, etc., is often not up to the task. It does not tell them that what has happened since the civil rights movement has been largely government sponsored, but it has put at risk the entire Black community. And being that is not taught in the schools, it needs to be taught by our religious institutions very thoroughly. If you believe that Black people deserve to be arrested 60 times more frequently than whites, then you are, by definition, believing there is something wrong with the Black people. And this is where we start to see that systemic racism coming up with children. So we need to teach them how this is happening, what is causing this. There are very good documentaries that can be watched for kids that are in high school. Some kids in middle school would get something out of After Selma, which is a really good documentary and explains very concisely what laws have changed and how it has affected the Black community. And I would encourage parents and organizations to use that to the extent that they can, because we're not going to just get people to listen to a speech. I think we have to go to what is out there that is visual. And people are used to getting information from the TV. So doing a documentary, I think it's free on Prime, this one is, but others are on Netflix or Hulu. It's easy to get these things, but convincing the community that they need to be showing this to their children is going to take some doing. And that's the core part that I would like to see our organization and the churches, all of the religious community leaders pointing towards and starting to get the adults, the educators together and understanding that how misleading just the evening news is if you don't know the background. Because we're going to have to provide the history. Because without the history, we don't have any way of teaching them that this is not the way the Black people are. It's the way the laws and police have affected how the Black people are. And so it's going to take that education sort of as a central core before we can even get to other resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Davis raised his hand.
Yeah, I think there are two parts to this question, or two questions here. One is, what do we teach? And what are the, second is the resources. The first question is really, really important. What do we teach our kids about systemic racism? And I believe that there's a very steep learning curve for many people as to the nature of systemic racism. I think we teach our kids from an early age, all through school, and in our congregations and in society, on television, the more you know, all that sort of stuff, about how we should treat other people nicely and how we shouldn't treat people, think of them differently because they are disabled or because they're gay or because they're Black or because they're Muslim or whatever. But to teach them the concept of systemic racism and what the implications have been and are today, that's, I believe, a very steep learning curve. And for that, we need some really strong help. I mean, I know of the ADL, which has been doing this sort of work since like 1913. And there are organizations across the spectrum that do really, really good work with, as Sister Deborah said, with videos and talks and movies, etc. But first, we really have to teach them this concept, which is an unfamiliar concept for many people, of systemic racism, not just being a racist, but systemic racism.
Mm-hmm. Mother Dawn.
Well, and I think that means just talking openly to our kids and even to our congregations. You know, the mainline story is, it still goes like this. We don't often refute, and we should refute more. We should be able to refute this story to our children and to our congregations, that Black people aren't by percentage more often poor because they don't work as hard, or they aren't as well educated because they choose not to be. It is because for every generation, they have been given less opportunity. White people have had privilege in the way the government has worked, in the way the education system has worked. It has put us ahead in every way, so that when we start out, we're already ahead. And to understand that fundamentally is to begin to understand that somebody is starting at a different place, not because they're fundamentally a different kind of human being.
Thank you. Anybody else care to share anything in response to that? Naeem?
I guess something to say I would like to share is that the thing is part of the second question, said what resources are available to parent and caregiver and faith leaders. I think the first thing we have to be as a faith leader, are we educating ourselves first? Are we removing our biases before we start teaching others? Are we looking at our own history and examining that and evaluating that history and be able to criticize it and critique it? Once we are confident, we are at that point, then we can reach out to our kids and community and teach them, knowing that I know my history, I know what I have done or my generation have done before. Now I can come with a clean slate and teach from a knowledge base, not from something I just picked up from TV or something like that. It's very important to go through yourself first, as it specifically in the Quran, it says the only way you can start is you have to start from within yourself. Change yourself first before you change other people.
Mhm. True. Thank you.
I think too, one of the real challenges in this is that, and the question has to be asked, it's a very hard question, and that is, are those who have been granted through privilege, through color, skin tone, the opportunities to advance further than others, are they willing to give up our share in that? Because at the end of the day, I mean, what are we teaching our kids about systemic racism? I would call that table talk and pillow talk. And what, as it said earlier, you don't address, what you don't refute, then becomes cemented in a child's mind that this particular behavior is acceptable. And so the first thing that has to happen is just laying it on the line. Can white America accept the fact that some of the things that they do on purpose and possibly not even realizing that help develop racial biases within their children? And so they end up passing it on to a whole nother generation. If I'm sitting at a table and I'm a teacher or whatever, and I say, boy, this little black girl just da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, what that child hears at that table is subconsciously, the black kid done this. If that's repeated enough, eventually that becomes a bias or the way that they begin to think that black people behave and act. And so if that mom or that parent doesn't take the time to explain, as I think Dr. Don said, the totality of what happened, or maybe it was Mother Deborah, the totality of what happened in that situation, then that kid begins to develop a bias about a group of people because they don't know the full story.
Right.
Can I add something? I'm sorry, I know I spoke already, but you know, that's a really important concept that is going to be one of the hardest for us of lighter skin to really accept. That privilege literally means private law, and we have benefited from this private law that affects us, and the knowledge that we are going to have to give something up. Yes, we've always been taught, let's bring up to our level people who are disadvantaged, or who have been pushed down, who have been oppressed. But the notion that we're going to have to give something up, that's going to be real tough. And that's going to be a real tough sell. And it's important, but it's going to be tough.
Right.
Good point.
Can I add this in? And I think in the conversation of teaching our kids about systemic racism is a little bit different in a black home as well. For example, I remember having the conversation with my father when I was 15 years old, studying to get my driver's license. He gave me my first lesson on systemic racism. He said the system is designed against you. So if you ever get pulled over by the police, he gave me the procedures in order to protect myself. He says, turn the dome light on, put your hands on the steering wheel, know exactly where your registration and your insurance is, and when he comes, tell him exactly what you're doing. He's protecting you against systemic racism because he know the history of black young men getting pulled over in police cars. And two, systemic racism isn't something that just started. It's been in since the beginning of our time, even in the Constitution, when you had slave owners claiming that all men are created equally. How can you say that when you consider black men 2/3 of a man?
You
and
can't get more
allow the
systemic than
Indians
that.
no reason, you didn't have no reason to let the Indians vote at all. So it goes way back. And so in order to dismantle and to teach our kids about systemic racism, we have to be honest and have an open conversation with them and tell them this country was designed on that.
Thank you. Sam, are we ready to move on to question 3?
Okay, question 3.
Is for
yeah.
for Naeem Balut.
Okay, social justice issues encompass more than police shootings of unarmed black men and women. what other areas of concern related to racial inequality have you begun to identify and formalize strategies in our community?
Thank you. I know we just talked about social injustice, that it's not current. It's not something that just popped up 30 days ago. It's been in our history from day one. What other areas of concern? I went through this and I got only 3 items that I can muster and came up with. When we see there's injustice in those 3. First one is the housing market. How the housing market is treating people of different races and different colors, where to look for houses, where to look for apartment, even when you have real estate agent taking people to a specific location based on their color or based on the race, where they can fit, where they cannot fit. The second part that I found to be socially injustice is employment. The employment rate of people of color is less than for white. Sending an application in, sending for a job interview will get you less responses or less affirmative responses if you are of a different race than being white. And the last one that I added is the criminal justice has some inequality in it as well. We see the years for a black is different than serving for the same crime for white and black is 2 different things. It's taking place in our community. Those 3 things I identified as being beyond just a police shooting of unarmed black male or black woman, housing market, the employment, and the criminal justice. What strategies do we have to resolve this? Is back again to education. You have to educate those people. You have to put them back in training. You have to make sure they know what they're doing, to make sure they look at the people as a person, not at the color of their skin, look at their hearts. If they're looking for a housing or for a house, show them the house they're looking for. Don't look what they look like, and trying to think on their behalf and say, oh yeah, they might be fitting better in their own black community or in this community or that community. Do not do that. Treat them all equally wherever you go. A job will be the same issue. When you apply for a job, do not look at the race of it. Look at the education level, look at the experience level, and open your businesses up for that level that you're looking for. And the third thing is justice. Justice, or the word just came from being equal. You can't have a word of justice and have 2 different systems of justice. A white justice and a black justice or brown justice. Justice is just. You have to be even. You have to be fair, regardless of the color of your skin. You look at the crime and you act on that crime and you send based on that crime. Those 3 things that I listed in the strategy that we're working for might help. And it has to start with education at a young age. Thank you.
Anyone else care to comment on that?
I'm sorry, I have a lot to say. I
Yeah,
apologize.
no, go ahead.
But
Go ahead.
the question dealt with strategies, and everything that Naeem said was absolutely correct, but it all falls on the individual to change their behavior. And unfortunately, I think the strategy is more than that. When it comes to employment and housing, I think there have to be laws that are implemented that are and accompanying punishments for not implementing them, to make sure that people are disincentivized to do such things. When it comes to law enforcement, again, it'll have to be laws and people watching to make sure that those laws are kept. It is very true that we all ought to strive for justice, but that's not a strategy, unfortunately. That's a sermon. And for strategies, I think laws have to be passed and enforced.
And maybe a parallel example is a big systemic problem like what's happening with the environment. I can recycle on my own. I can try and save energy on my own, make my carbon footprint smaller on my own. Those are all good things to do. But until the government makes us all be better stewards of the environment, until huge corporations make their products better for the environment, we can't have much, we don't have as much impact as individuals. And so we need government and big organizations, big institutions to help us change what is the status quo.
Deborah?
Yes, that is true. We do need big institutions and government to help, but that also puts this in the realm of something that we can do very little about besides go vote. You know, while we need to be in touch with our congressmen and our president and to give them both the education and the ideas of how new laws could help, we need to, as leaders of communities, be looking for a way to educate our people all across the ages, because it doesn't just start at 3 years old. This is something that is learned repeatedly in our school system. It is something that is taught in the evening news when kids see that it's the Black man that did this, did that. When it's talked about, I'm sorry, I don't remember who, but someone mentioned, you know, at the supper table that if you're always saying the little Black girl, or you are putting that as a distinction in your children's head, they need to hear about how this girl is so intelligent that she figured out this. You know, they need to hear a positive, and the distinction needs not to be always skin. I know it's so easy if you're giving a description of somebody, saying white or black or pink or purple is the easy thing to say, but in teaching children, it's very important that we keep that to a very minimum in putting the normal conversations that you have about friend Susie. That can't be about black and white, because if it is, you're giving that as a label that leads to systemic discrimination.
I'm gonna echo what Rabbi Michael Davis said earlier. I hate to say this, but as an African American man, 100% of my life, I am not sure at this point, honestly, that white America is ready to release that power base. I don't think they are, and it's so ingrained from judges. Look at what you've got to deconstruct to make this happen. Judges, attorneys, police, business owners, doctors, lawyers, the janitor. You've got to deconstruct a whole system that has been in place for, I don't want to say 400 years, because that's slavery based, for 1,000 years. And if I've benefited from this power base for that long, now it's my normal way of thinking. I don't even understand how I'm benefiting because it's so normal. So what will it take to deconstruct this monster?
Yeah,
Besides heaven helping us? I don't know. And until people are willing to release some of that power, 20 years from now, we'll be having this conversation.
Getting back to what Naeem said, and bring up what you brought up. Several years ago, I was introduced to a concept that I had never heard of before, a movement to ban the box.
Oh, yeah.
I had never heard of that before. And my nephew's in the criminal justice system, and I had to have him explain to me the details of it. And then when I brought it up to people, to white people who had never heard of it, and I explained what it was, they were totally against the notion of banning the box in the employment application. And so it's not only to inform them, but you're right, it's to convince them that this is something they're going to have to give up on.
You have to be convinced in the first place that there is white privilege,
Yes.
and then that it's the status quo.
Yeah.
And then you have to be willing to change the status quo.
Yeah, and the parameters of it. How big it is.
Yeah. And to change the status quo means you're willing to give something up to make it different.
That's gonna be tough.
But you do, but that's a challenge that the community has to face, and our leader has to face, right? That's a challenge. You have to give something up. You took so much, right? I mean, you took everything, and now we're only asking you to share some of it. So get down from your horse. You're sitting on that horse and you're taking everybody down. It's time for you to just get down from the horse and be with the rest of walk on earth like everybody else does. I think that's the challenge that we have to face ourselves. You might not gain something now, and you might say, what am I gaining now from this white privilege? Yeah, okay, you're not gaining right now materialistically or influentially, but you have to give it up. You have to come to terms with it. Okay, you have to. This is the challenge that every community faces, and every faith will be challenged with it. Are you strong enough to go back to your history and rewrite it? And you face it. That's a challenge. If you're not, if you're just gonna give it another coat of paint, it's gonna peel off a few years from now. You gotta be able to face it and come back and say, things have to be different. We have to address it, we have to rewrite it.
Well,
And this idea that winner will write the history has to be rewritten.
Mm-hmm.
Has to be written actually with blood and tears. Has to be written in a proper manner where everybody gets their equity in it.
I think sacrifices are going to have to be made by everybody, especially white America, since they were the beneficiary of all the privileges, more or less. It was written on their behalf, a lot of things. So I think sacrifices, regardless of how much, is going to have to be made by everyone.
Thank you. Sam, can we move on to question 4? And this one is for Pastor Van.
Yeah, Pastor Van, in what ways can religious and spiritual leaders take charge or collaborate with other community organizations for the purpose of addressing and/or improving communication concerning injustices that arise within the community, such as the Albert Wilson rape case?
Wow, this is a question that is going to steam up the lines a little bit. But I mean, here's the reality of it, and I think there's a twofold answer. First of all, when these cases come up, trying to make sure that these young people are not forgotten by a system and just placed in there, where, especially if they don't have the economic prowess to be able to fight that system, and they just end up becoming a victim of it. That's critical. And so as faith leaders and spiritual leaders, we have to be able to lift up our voices collectively, because honestly, one black pastor yelling is just one black pastor yelling. 100 pastors of all races saying the same thing can move the pendulum forward. So it has to be an active effort, number one. Number two, from an African-American perspective or a black perspective, I have to educate young people. And I think Pastor Kirkendall talked about the talk, but there's another talk that I've been having very frequently with several young African-American men. And that talk is making sure that they govern themselves accordingly And I asked them, can I talk about tough stuff in this dialogue? I asked them, what's the issues? And these young men responded to me that sometimes people of other races, especially young females, throw themselves at them until there becomes a problem, or until dad finds out that you were talking to this black guy, and in order to clear your slate, you now say that he was touching you inappropriately or kissing you inappropriately, and all you're doing is clearing the slate between you and your dad is now mad at you for 2 weeks. But this young man is about to face 20 years in prison behind that. I remember we were at a camp one time, and I took a bunch of high schoolers there, and I finally had to tell a leader, listen, I'm gonna just be real, so please don't be offended. I don't need these white girls out in front of my dorm room with my guys every morning waiting on them. That's a problem waiting to happen, because I've got 15, oh God, y'all gonna kick me off the panel. I've got 15 horny little high schoolers. That's just the truth. What do you think's gonna happen? What do you think? If you throw yourself at this young, what do you think is gonna, you know what's gonna happen. And so when somebody finds out, now you cry rape, when it wasn't rape at all, you were just as much initiating it as he was. Or matter of fact, you were the one that really initiated it. But because you can cry rape, and the penal system is designed to attack and villainize the black man, so now he's going to jail and you're going back home. And he kissed you, so you wrecked his life for a little bit of tongue. I'm gonna get kicked off here tonight. Oh my goodness. You wrecked his life. Are you serious? I mean, come on, so I have to have conversations with young African-American men in particular and tell them, listen, you have to be careful, because one night of fun, consensual fun, can cost you your life. And everybody else goes on with life as normal, and now you're stuck in a system. And think about it from these terms. So this young man, I don't know the judge, but I've heard rumors about the judge. This young man goes before a judge who already has a track record of being harsh on African Americans. Now, what do you think, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but I want to consider with me. So what do you think if whoever the judge is sitting there and he's upset because maybe his daughter was interested in the black guy, but he convinced her not to be with him. And now he's got the opportunity to make a young man pay. You think that young man has got a snowball's chance to get out of this situation? I doubt it. So as religious leaders, I mean, we have to storm the bank, storm the walls, however you want to call it, when these things present themselves, number one. But it has to be more than just African-American or black pastors speaking. It has to be a collective body of all races coming together and saying, this is wrong. It has to be that. Number two, as an African-American leader, I have to make sure I'm educating my young African-American men, not just about what to do, as Pastor Kirkendall said, when the police pull them all over, but also what to do if there's perchance a Caucasian female that wants to talk to them, what the potential problems can be with that. Now, at the end of the day, love who you love, marry who you marry. But when you're 15, you need to watch yourself. And I've been taking the time. Matter of fact, I just had a conversation with about 5 young men about 2 weeks ago on this very exact subject. I told them, listen, you have got to be careful, because one slip up, even though everything was consensual, can cost you 20 years of your life. So we've got to be aware of this. And this is a problem that goes back to people in power who now have the ability to not only slap somebody's wrist, but to put their thumb on them or put their foot on their back or their knee on their neck, and not kill them physically, but kill their potential for the next 20 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pastor Kirkendall?
Yeah, and I think too that when you compare incidents like that to other cases that involve young white men, there's a book out called Black Road, White Justice. And what it does is compares cases of young black man versus young white man. Similar cases, same amount of drugs, same amount of incident, pretty much the same. But when the judge hit the gavel, the young black man get an average of 10 more additional years than the young white man. And that's throughout the justice system, that it's shown to be unfair all the way around. And so as leaders, we have to be aware of that and collectively, and I like what he said, collectively speak out against it. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and we should stand on for what we think is right.
Right.
And we can't romanticize this any longer. You know, there's the big conversations about George Washington and the children that he fathered with his black basically slave. But if you really look at that, she was 14 when the first child was born. Do you think that was consensual? Or would we call that rape in 2020? She was 14. Mm-hmm. So don't romanticize stuff when that wasn't the case at all. And I think that we're seeing this happen. I just learned of another young man who's facing the same situation. And one of the young men that I was talking to in my conversation 2 weeks ago said that they was at a party, just hanging out, whatever, and they got kind of kissing, whatever. And the young lady told him the next day, "Hey, I didn't consent to us kissing last night." Do you know how dangerous that was for that young man? What the potential was for him at that moment? And he's about to fall over backwards because he doesn't know what to do, but he's seeing his life flash in front of him simply because all of a sudden she had a change of heart. It's bad. I'll say it like that.
Thank you.
And I think you were right. I mean, earlier when you spoke that you talked to your students, 15 years old men, and you told the people around you, said, please move those ladies away from them. You did try. That's your job as a spiritual leader. You did step in because you could see the harm coming a mile away. You knew something has to be done. So you did step in. You did create some sort of a barrier, and you did protect them. I think you're probably grateful for what you have done. And that's what we do. We educate them because we don't want them to be in this mess. We don't want them to be stuck in their life ruined because it felt like it was, and it looks good or whatever it was. You stepped in and you created that boundary and you protected them.
There's also a moral responsibility on the part of the women or the girls or the judges about being ones with power and bearing false witness. I mean, that the lesson about not bearing false witness is one of the oldest ones in the Holy Scripture. Mm-hmm. And that's on us faith leaders to continue to commend to everybody, is not to bear false witness.
If I may add, if we step beyond the specific situation of the sex involved, the question dealt with injustices within the community, and one of the things that I think Dr. Van said, that if one black preacher stands up and yells, or if a bunch of black preachers stand up and yell, it's still going to be a black issue. This is a time for communication. This would be a time, if we have allies, if we have communication already, where the someone close to the situation could turn to their allies and say, here's the situation, step up and help. And so it's not just a bunch of black preachers, it's also Catholic and Protestant, white, and rabbis and imams, and everyone standing up saying, wait a minute, we're watching you. We're watching what's happening. So it's not, this is a broader issue, I think, than just you know, male and female teenagers going too far.
Thank you, everyone. Sam, are we ready to move on? The next question is for Reverend Kirkendall.
Yeah, in his letter from Birmingham jail, this is Dr. King, he addresses a lack of urgency from his white counterparts, his white spiritual leaders. What conversations are being discussed so non-Black leaders have the same sense of urgency as Black spiritual leaders with regard to Black lives and other racism that impacts multi-ethnic people?
Well, we understand that Dr. King wrote this letter from the Birmingham jail to his critics, which were white clergy.
Right.
And he was addressing the fact that they thought maybe he's from Atlanta. Why was he even in Birmingham? But he wanted them to know, we need to know, that injustice in Birmingham is also injustice in Atlanta, that injustice in Minnesota is also injustice right here in Wichita, that we have to stand because injustice anywhere is a threat against justice everywhere. And he wanted his clergy to know that. He really wanted them to know that being an ally requires taking action, that simply caring sometimes is not enough, that you have to take action. You're not an ally until you're willing to stand up, be bold enough to do something about it, even in the midst of what your threat may be. So yours may be different than mine, a threat of losing your job, a threat of losing your position, friends, or social status, but you have to be bold enough to stand up for what's right, because wrong is wrong. And until we collectively stand up together like they did in King's March, and it's just a voice unheard. So collectively, Dr. King wanted us to realize that we can help bring about a change.
Anybody else?
All right, I'm going to say something. I'm sorry. I just reread the letter recently, and one of the things that struck me was that he seemed to be saying that people were trying to advise him, don't go so far, don't march, don't strike, negotiate, sit down and talk. And he was trying to convince them that it's time to go beyond that. And I think that comes from the point that the people who were speaking to him could sympathize with what he's going through, but they could not empathize with it. They did not go through it themselves. And so I think there's always going to be that gap between a people who has gone through this sort of struggle for generations, and a person who tries to understand that and sympathize. Sometimes, and I've been trying to tell this to my folks here, sometimes we have to do the very difficult task of shutting up and following rather than standing up and leading. Shut up and listen and follow. And follow someone else's lead, someone who knows better than you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I think it comes a time when you ought to be quiet and follow, but there's come a time that where even white America have to stand up and say it's wrong.
Yeah.
Here, how you look at it, where you look, it's wrong. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And Dr. King is saying until we all can come together and do that, you know, until it just looked like another black argument, a complaining black man. And that we have to stand collectively and recognize what's going on in our world today. Even today, some of what he's saying in the letter back then applies to us today, that we have to come out of our comfort zone. It's one thing to say you sympathize with me sitting in your office with the air conditioner on. This is another thing. You say, hey man, I'm going outside this office. I'm going right down at the Century 2 where they're protesting at, and I'm going to stand with them young black kids, even though we don't have a lot in common, but I see what they're up against, and they need our voice as well. So we could talk a good game of racism and our approaches while we're sitting in the office, but you have to go out where the rubber meets the road sometimes.
Yeah.
True. Anyone else?
Well, again, I'm going to say it goes back to, I'm going to keep hammering on this. It goes back to that power base. I mean, until those that are in power are willing, and it's been said earlier, not even necessarily give up power, but just at least let it be an equal playing field. You know, I'm not asking for you to give up something. I'm just saying, can we make it even? You know, but until even, you have to even say, even with religious leaders, until you're ready to feel the pinch or the pain of releasing some of that, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge.
Thank you, everyone. Sam, the last question, question 6, is we're starting with Mother Dawn.
Yeah. As faith leaders, what actions are you and your congregants doing to help those in your community and other communities treat everyone equally?
Well, I'm going to take it to where the rubber meets the road on this one and give a specific example. Something that has happened in our congregation over the last couple of years has been a rise in fear of security when we worship. And this has been not necessarily as a result of race, it's been because of active shooting. But it means that anytime that someone we don't know comes into our church, there's a feeling of anxiety. And so the conversation we've had to have is out loud in front of everybody from the pulpit. Just because somebody walks in here who's Black doesn't mean all of a sudden they're under suspicion. It means that we welcome whoever comes in here. We assess what they're doing based on their behavior. We don't have to respond immediately. It's not until somebody takes out a knife that we know that we have to call 911, right? It's not until it becomes painfully obvious that somebody's off of their medication that we have to call somebody. Many times we just have visitor and we want them to be comfortable in our presence. We talk about that all the time, that we're sorry that our congregation is so white, that we have so few people of brown and Black in our congregation. And yet you can feel it tense up when someone we don't know comes into the congregation. So I have had to just talk really clearly to the congregation about the fact we don't immediately make judgments based on the color of skin. We talk about what somebody's doing and their behavior. That's my rubber hits the road example.
I think that, could I say? I think that we all can relate to what you're saying because of the fact after the shooting in South Carolina, I think a lot of Black churches was well aware when a white man walked into the room.
Yeah.
It was all kind of looking. Matter of fact, I had to send some deacons over to security training over to Bill Vann's church because we all aware of what the possibilities of what can happen. But what I love about the Greater Wichita Ministerial League, and I'm not selling myself, is that it's such a wide spectrum of different pastors in there. We have some to the far right that are pro-life and they don't want to hear nothing else. We have some that say it's okay for a gay man to be in the pulpit and preaching. And so it's a wide spectrum of ministers that come together, but they accept each other's differences. And we have one thing in common. We believe that Jesus is Lord. And so we build on that. And so some years ago, they come out with a pulpit exchange. And I believe Sam had something to do that, to where we would go to all white churches. I was a black preacher in an all white church. And when I got there, I mean, they really, really just made sure they showed me it showed me a really, really comfortable time, made me feel comfortable. And then when they came to my church, and I told them, you're getting ready to leave Jerusalem, you're on your way to Samaria now, because this is in the neighborhood where the gang is at. You know, and this is true, Ray and Pookie and the gang, they're all there. And we have an all black congregation. But after the 3 years of pulpit exchange, they look forward to coming over to my church, and I look forward to going to their church. I think we all have to just come together and really get to know each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anyone else? Well, that was the last question, Sam. And I think there was something you wanted to share at the end.
I don't think there's another question that we have.
No.
And it is time for us to quit. So I just want to thank you. This has been great. And it was a nice way to conclude this. I want to say thank you to Chelsea for helping us put these questions together as well. Chelsea, yeah. I want to say thank you to Maria for helping to get the word out. And then I would like to leave with just a statement here that comes from Martin Luther King. At the end of his big, long letter in Birmingham jail, this is what he said, and I think it will send us off. It's a nice send-off statement. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and sisterhood and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all its scintillating beauty. Yes, we've got a long way to go, folks, but you've really helped tonight. Thank you so much. I hope you will continue to be with us as we have another one coming up in about a month from now. We will have another panel. Thank you so much for helping. And thank you, all of you who are listening. Let's hear from you. Bye. Good night for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening, everyone. God bless and keep you.
You too.
God bless you.
Bye.